not the God who is in heaven. You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Lord, God of our fathers, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people. Our fathers, are you not the God who is in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Oh Lord, God of our fathers, are you not the God who reigns in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Power and might be in your hand, and no one can withstand you. Oh, yeah. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. Oh Lord. 1, 2, oh yeah. Revival, praise him, that's the battle plan. Praise him now, it's wartime. Praise him on the front lines. Praise him. Revival, praise him, that's the battle plan. Praise him now, it's wartime. Praise him on the front lines. Praise him. Jehoshaphat cried to the God of Jacob, cried to the God of Israel. The enemy is rising up against me, but yours is the face I seek. The Spirit of the Lord came up upon them, said this is the battle plan. This battle's battle's not yours, it belongs to the Lord. Salvation's coming to your hands. Revival, praise Him, that's the battle plan. Revival. Oh, praise Him now, it's wartime. Praise Him on the front lines. Praise Him. All in silence, bound up in prison, while preaching God's gospel grace. They love Yeshua more than their own lives, so in the night hour they praised. And then God's earthquake shook off the shackles, said, listen what the Spirit speaks. This battle's not yours, it belongs to the Lord, and whom the Son sets free is free indeed. Yeah, revival, praise Him, that's the battle plan. Praise Him now, it's wartime. Praise Him on the front lines. Praise Him in these last days. Israel's the poor again. The enemy wants to see her slain. But just as it was in days of old, the Lord wants to hear our praise. Yeah, the Spirit of the Lord come up upon us, said this is revival plan. This battle's not yours, it belongs to the Lord. Salvation isn't close at hand. Revival, praise Him, that's the battle plan. Praise Him now, it's wartime. Praise Him on the front lines. Praise Him, oh, revival. Praise Him, that's the battle plan. Praise Him now, it's wartime. Praise Him on the front lines. Praise Him.
Upon a time, there were men and women who lived righteously, blameless in God's eyes, working for a prize that was to come. Then an evil ruler raised his hand against the throne of heaven, striking down children of the King. Why were they consequence at all? Or maybe he was threatened by the silence of their battle cry. How long, oh Lord? How long, oh Lord, till you avenge the blood of those who died for your name's sake? They gave their lives, obeying your commands. How long, oh Lord? How long till you avenge the ones who prove their love to the one who did not sin, whose blood was shed? The price the law demands for the sinners in your hands. Oh, not the righteous man, not the righteous man. How long, oh Lord? I wanna know. How long, oh Lord? I wanna know. Look upon us precepts of your law, written here upon our hearts, are broken now. Broken for the ones who've turned a deaf ear to the laws of life and suffered not to live within your grace. As we come face to face with death again, we'll gladly give our lives to know we did the best to bury sin. How long, oh Lord, how long, oh Lord, till you avenge the blood of those who died for your name's sake? They gave their lives, obeying your commands. How long, oh Lord, how long till you avenge the ones who proved their love to the one who did not sin, whose blood was shed, the price the law demands for the sinners in your hands? Oh, not the righteous man, not the righteous man. How long, oh Lord, I wanna know. How long, oh Lord, I wanna know, I wanna know. How long, oh Lord, I wanna know. How long, oh Lord, I wanna know. Oh, how long. Once upon a time.
Hear the battle cry. Don't be afraid to die. The just shall live by faith. From temptation, he will make a way of escape. I put Yahweh's armor on. In him the battle has been won. When I've done all to stand, I'll stand therefore as he guides me with his mighty strong hand. No weapon formed against me will prosper. Every lying tongue spoken he shall condemn. In Yeshua I've been given all authority over all the power of the enemy. I won't lean upon my own understanding. I'll acknowledge Yahweh God in all of my ways. Let no deceit or guile be found upon these lips, ever pressing into your presence in this holy place. Hear the battle cry. Don't be afraid to die. The just shall live by faith. From temptation, he will make a way of escape. I put Yahweh's armor on. In him the battle has been won. When I've done all to stand, I'll stand therefore as he guides me with his mighty strong hand. I put on your helmet of salvation and your breastplate of righteousness. I gird myself about with your belt of truth I so love. Cover my feet with the gospel of peace from above. I take hold your shield of faith to quench the fiery darts of Satan and my unseen enemies. I lift high the sword of your spirit, which is your living word. He who has an ear to hear is gonna hear it. Hear the battle cry. Don't be afraid to die. The just shall live by faith. From temptation he will make a way of escape. I put Yahweh's armor on. In him the battle has been won. When I've done all to stand, I'll stand therefore as he guides me with his mighty strong hand. Weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through the power of your spirit, casting down of every vain imagination, to bring each thought to your obedience and to your subjection. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, with each other, but against all the ruling and unseen principalities, against every stronghold that seeks to hinder, oppress, and to bind us. In your name we defeat all the powers of darkness, wicked spirits in high places. Can't you hear the battle cry? Look up, for his redemption draweth nigh. Filled with his spirit from on high, to ourselves we are called to die. Oh, can't you hear the battle cry? 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 The battle cry, the battle cry, the battle cry.
I will be a wall of fire round about you. I will be the glory within
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Battle Cry 2018. We're going to start the meeting off with a prayer from Jacob.
Heavenly Father, we just come before you and we want to ask for your blessing on this meeting and this message. We just pray that the message you have would go forth and that the words that need to be spoken will be spoken. And Father, just bless your people now, send forth your Spirit, and be with us. In Yeshua's name I pray, amen.
Thank you, Jacob. And now we're going to have a special presentation from Eliyahu ben David on the last age of the world.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the last age of the world. This is the conclusion, the final message of these 4 messages total that I'm giving on this subject. And all of these are available on YouTube. Look at the picture. This is what the last age of the world is about. Crisis. Situations beyond your control. And shortly the world will be coming into a time like this. That's why I'm doing these messages. Before I start, I want you to know that this video is going to be fairly long. I've pared down this information as much as I can, but for it to be coherent to you, you'll have to hear all that I have here. And since it is so vital to you because of the things that are ahead, I would encourage you to find a time where you can watch this. Again, you know, if you're seeing this is live, this is good, but even so, try to find a time when things are quiet, where you have time, where you can really focus on this and follow it, because it's very important to your future. Let's take up now where we left off, picking up the thread from the previous messages that we have given. We began by talking about the 7 days of creation. And each of these 7 days has very specific characteristics. We will be talking about these more because this comes into play in our discussion in this teaching. The 7th day is very important because the 7th day is when the Creator rested from all of his work. All of the other 6 days have a definite end. The 7th day did not end. It's still continuing right now. What we learned previously is that this 7th day is divided into 7 ages of 1,000 years each. And this is according to these verses, as well as the fact that the final age of this Sabbath period is the 7th age, the 7th 1,000 years, the 1,000-year reign of Messiah. And this indicates for us the length of these 1,000-year days of this last of the creative days. Here we see the chronology, updated using modern science. However, chronologies of the Bible have been done for hundreds of years with amazing accuracy because the Bible is very specific in its time information. And what this latest information shows is that Adam was created in 4001 BC. And using the begats of Scripture and various time periods in Scripture, that means that 6,000 years will be completed, or has been completed actually, in the year 2000 AD. That's 6,000 years from the creation of Adam. Now, this has been established also through astronomical dating. And using astronomical information that's very specific in the Bible from Noah's flood. Noah's flood has been pinpointed to 2345 BC. So if you add to that 2000 for the AD years and the 2345 BC for the BC years and the 1656 years that we have of the begats before the flood, that brings you back to 4001 BC. And this timing has been fairly universally accepted, very close to this, as the time when the end of the age was expected and the Messiah was expected to return. And yet, when 6,000 years was up in 2000 AD, that didn't happen. And some people were disappointed and wondered why. Here's the reason why. The chronology that has been done from the creation of Adam tracks the ages of the world from Adam. However, Yah's time is tracking 6 ages of the 7th day, a time period that started later, somewhat later. So these two time periods are actually like apples and oranges. One is not the same as the other. This is why we have passed 6,000 of the years of the world according to the ages of the world from Adam, and yet Messiah has not yet returned. So it may seem that he has tarried, it may seem that he has delayed, but actually, according to Yahweh's time, he's not delayed at all. So what we see here is there is a gap between 6,000 years of the ages of the world and the 6,000 year mark of this 1,000 year age. And we wonder, can the length of this gap be known? And that's what we're going to explore together now as we move along, finding the length of the gap. Basically, if we want to know how long the gap is at the end, we have to find how long the gap was in the beginning. Doesn't that make sense? And so we have to start from the creation of Adam and look at what happened from the creation of Adam forward and see if we can identify when the 7th day actually started, and then we will find the gap. Now, this is going to be a fairly detailed process, so you'll have to concentrate as we go along on the facts. Now, before we do this, some people will look and say, what gap? Isn't this day, the 6th day, only 24 hours? How could this affect anything significantly? Well, in the other messages, we've already talked about this somewhat, about the length of these creative days, that they could not possibly be 24-hour days. However, some people might object to that and point to verses like Genesis 1:31, which occurs at the end of the 6th day, where it says, and the evening and the morning were the 6th day. It says something similar using that same phrase on all of the 6 days, but not on the 7th day. The truth is that this phrase defines a definite end to the creative day. It's not meant to define the entire length of the creative day. What Yahweh is doing in the way that he is explaining the creation of the world is he's doing it in such a way that he is essentially setting it out the same way that the Hebrew worker would look at time. In other words, through the day, a man works. And in the evening, what does he do? He goes to bed, right? And then in the morning, he starts another workday. So that's what it's talking about. It's setting a definitive end to the length of the creative day. It's not defining the whole length of a day. And it doesn't anyway, because an evening and a morning doesn't make a whole day, does it? So as we look at this, we realize we are looking at ages. Now, this becomes obvious as we look closely at what happened in the Garden of Eden. One thing we notice in that account is that seeds do not grow into trees in 24 hours. During the sixth day, really near the end of it, it tells us that God planted a garden. It doesn't say God created a garden. If we said that God created a garden, it certainly could have been done in 24 hours if he wanted to do it. Planting a garden is something else, because you and I plant gardens if we want to. Planting a garden means the natural process of growing plants. You plant seeds, and they grow into plants. It goes on and it says, out of the ground made the Lord God to grow, and the word grow literally means sprout, every tree. So once again, this is talking about the natural process of what happens in a garden, and there was enough time that went by for seeds planted in the garden to become trees. Clearly, that's talking about something greater than 24 hours. This is just one indication that the day is years, not just hours. Let's now look at Adam and see how the time period between the time when Adam was created and the beginning of the seventh day forms a gap. Let's define that gap now. There is a time gap between the creation of Adam and the beginning of the seventh day Sabbath rest of Yahweh. The length of this gap must be added to the ages of the world chronology to determine the end of this age and the start of the final 1,000 years of Yahweh's 7,000 year seventh day Sabbath rest. So this is what we're trying to accomplish. Now, we notice there are certain events that happened after Adam's creation. Let's look at some of these events. We notice that the last events recorded in the sixth creative day are the creation of woman. This was God's final creative act, in fact, of the sixth creative day. We also find there the blessing and commissioning of man and woman to be fruitful, to multiply, and to rule. And after that, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished in all their vast array. Now notice, if God says it's very good, it's very good. It was perfect. Some people think that there was an earlier creation that failed, but then God would not be able to say this at this point in time. So it's indicating that there's been one creation that has happened, and at the close of 6 days of that creation, the Creator has pronounced it very good and finished. With his creative work finished at the close of the sixth creative day, God's great seventh-day rest begins. Genesis 2:2 tells us, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. So what we glean from this is that Yah's seventh-day rest began after the creation of woman, but before sin entered the world. We notice everything was fine, everything was very good when he got to the end of the sixth creative day, and everything was finished. So from this we can understand that sin came later after the seventh day had begun. So let's look at these facts and think about how long it may have been until the creation of woman happened. In other words, how long was Adam alone in the garden? Well, let's think about some of the things that he needed to do. Imagine yourself springing into existence. Do you think you'd get a handle on that in 24 hours? Probably not. How about developing a relationship with your Creator and receiving his commands? Do you think you'd get that totally under control in 24 hours? I've been growing in a relationship with my Creator for years, and I still have room to grow. Certainly, Adam needed to have a process like that too, to get to know his Creator, and the account indicates that he had such a process where he did get to know his Creator and his Creator's commands. I think before you can even do that, you have to get to know yourself. What am I? Who am I? Why am I here? What are these big things here? What are those creatures all around me? How did I get here? What is this all about? What am I supposed to do? Just because this is a story that appears in the Bible doesn't mean this is not a real man who would have the same kinds of reactions that any person would have. Any intelligent person would have to come to grips with the facts of existence. Learning to function in his new environment would have been interesting, wouldn't it? You know, when a baby comes into the world, they need to learn how to walk. They need to learn how to eat. They need to learn a lot of things. Adam was a full-grown man, but why should we think he didn't need to learn how to use his body? This involved a lot of experimentation to do different things. How was he going to know what was good for him to eat? How would he know how to collect that? How would he know how to care for the garden? Because he was actually put in the garden to care for it. This was a big job because this garden had 4 mighty rivers that originated in it. The garden was huge in size. It wasn't like a little garden in your backyard. And he had to care for it. So all of this suggests a significant amount of time that Adam was in the garden. And what about this? How long would it take Adam to name the animals? Do you think he got that done in a day? It tells us out of the ground, Yahweh Elohim formed every animal of the field and every bird of the field, and he brought them to the man to see what he would call them. Whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. And then it tells us the man gave names to all livestock, to the birds of the sky, and to every animal of the field. But for the man, there was not found a helper suitable for him. Well, this is an amazing story. And let's think about that. Whatever the man called every living creature, that was its name. Now, when we think of the word name in our modern culture, we usually just think of a label. So it doesn't really matter whether a person is called, Tom or Harry or Jim. It's just a label so that you'll be able to identify that person. The word name in Hebrew means a lot more than just a label. Hebrew names are words given to describe character. When you realize that, what you realize is that Adam had to actually spend a lot of time observing every living creature to see what its characteristics truly were in order to give each living creature a name. You know, scientists do this, don't they? They observe creatures and they learn their characteristics. And then they give them complicated Greek names. And if you ask one of them, how long does it take to be able to name all of these different kinds of creatures, I think they would tell you it would take a long time to do. It was a big process. So this task alone likely involved a significant number of years. This gap is getting bigger, isn't it? As we look more and more at what was actually happening during this time period, this gap is growing. Well, here's continuing the list, because we're not done yet. In the course of naming the animals, Adam had to discover that there was no mate for him among the animals. Now, the normal process among human beings is it takes people a while to start to feel the need for a mate. And especially since Adam had never seen a woman before, he probably didn't know that he needed one. And so that was a process to come to a place of realizing that he needed a mate and perhaps just having that feeling of loneliness. Finally, Yahweh met that need and performed an operation there in the garden, took a rib from the man and made a woman. And Adam received the woman, made from part of his own body. How long does it take to have a relationship with a woman, to develop a relationship with a woman? If you're going to get married, how long would it take you? You see, we're talking about a real man here. And again, this takes time, doesn't it? And then finally, they received the blessing and the empowerment, the command of Yahweh for the two of them. And finally, that period in the garden gave way to the seventh day. So as we look at all of this, we'd have to realize that Adam was in the garden for years before the woman was even created, and probably years afterwards. The exact amount of time is not stated. We also know that the next significant event mentioned in the account is the fall of Adam and Eve. And this happened after the start of the seventh day. So now we wonder, is there any outer limit on how long the gap could be? Well, the first time it mentions actual years, it tells us when Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son. But that son was not his first son, it was Seth. Before Seth was born, Adam had other children. Since no children were born in Eden and Adam became father to Seth at 130 years of age, the time gap must be something less than 130 years. But then, if we realize that Seth was really a replacement for Abel, and Cain and Abel were both born after the fall and the expulsion from Eden, then we realize that we have to significantly shorten that 130 years. And from the account, we see that Abel was born, he grew up, he followed Yahweh actually on his own and offering up sacrifices in his own behalf. So he was fully an adult as a shepherd when he was finally murdered by his brother Cain. And all of this happened before Seth was born. Well, in those times of lengthy lifespans, men apparently became father after considerably more years than they do today. Seth was 105 years old before he fathered a son. The very youngest father in Genesis was Enoch, who became a father at 65 years old. So we're doing some speculation now. We're just trying to get an idea of the time span rather than exactly put a date on it. But let's look at the numbers we've got. We have Enoch having the shortest number of years before becoming a father of 65 years. So let's see what happens if we use that number of years to speculate that Adam was 65 years old when Abel was born. I think that's a reasonable kind of speculation. Could have been older, though. And then we'll assign 30 years to Abel because he's obviously a full-grown man offering sacrifices of his own to Yahweh, so he's clearly on his own responsible for himself. So 30 years old is a time in the scriptures when that happens for people. So if you add the two lengths of time together, 65 years and 30 years, you get 95 years. So if you take the 130 years at which Adam fathered Seth, and you subtract from that these 95 years, you are left with 35 years unaccounted for. 35 years. So what does that mean to us? Well, again, this is only a speculation. But these unaccounted for 35 years reasonably allow something on the order of 3 to 4 decades before sin entered the world and Adam and Eve were expelled from Eden. So this is kind of helpful for us to make a reasonable estimate of what the time might have been, but we can't be certain of it. We can't narrow it down to a specific amount so far from the facts we've got. So is there a way to narrow this down? Well, there is another approach, and we're going to take a look at that now. Remember this quote, "For in as many days as the world was made, in so many thousand years shall it be concluded. This is an account of the things formerly created, as also it is a prophecy of what is to come." So in other words, the ancient sages believed that the days of creation actually were a prophecy of the 1,000-year ages of the final seventh day. So if they're prophetic, then in what way are they prophetic? And can that be helpful to us? Well, let's take a look at that. Again, we have the chart here of what happened over the 7 days of creation. And we've gone through this already. But now let's look at this chart in relationship to the seventh day. And here I've put that together for you. And you can see how these days connect together. And we're going to go through these one at a time and see in what way the creative day is prophetic of the 1,000-year period. Here's the first creative day. In the first creative day, Yahweh separated the light from the darkness. And in the first 1,000-year period, Yahweh separated the light from the darkness in the sense of separating good from evil. And if you follow the Genesis account, you see that's exactly what was happening during that period, right? Because what happens there? You have Cain and Abel, the good being separated from the evil. You have the line of Seth and the line of Cain. So really right at the beginning in that first 1,000 years, that's where that whole thing was set up of separating the good from the evil. And so would you say that day one of creation is prophetic of the first day, the first 1,000-year day? It's pretty clear, isn't it? Well, let's go on and see if that holds up. Here's day two. What happened in day two of the creative days is that Yahweh separated the waters from the land. In the second 1,000-year period that we're talking about, this is exactly what happened with Noah, right? Because the whole world was covered with water, and then what happened at the end after the flood? The water was separated from the land. So again, the second creative day is exactly prophetic of what happens on the second day of that great seventh day. Now, if we're looking at the millennial ages of the world, which is what we're doing, so we're still counting from Adam. We're not counting yet from the beginning of that seventh year day, because we haven't determined that yet. But if we're counting now from Adam, we're at day two. This brings us to 3001 BC, to 2001 BC. This is day two. Let's look at day three. Day three is interesting because day three is when Yahweh created seed-bearing plants and caused them to grow. Day three is when Yahweh raised up Abraham and began the seed of Abraham in the earth. And truly, this is what we see during this period, is the seed of Abraham being, growing, actually, into a nation, into the nation of Israel. Again, it's perfectly prophetic, isn't it, of that third 1,000-year period. This, now, according to the millennial ages of the world, that is before you add in the gap, was from 2001 BC to 1001 BC, the third 1,000-year day. Well, now we get to day four. On day four, Yahweh created the great lights in the sky. And what could that possibly symbolize except the light of the world coming into the world? This was from 1000 BC to 1 BC. This is the millennial age, day 4. This is not yet corrected for the 7th day age, 1,000-year age, the 4th age. However, the last year before this came to an end, in other words, in 2 BC, Messiah was born. So that's pretty amazing, isn't it? And this was not a surprise. Actually, this is what Jewish sages expected to have happen, because they had seen these correlations. They had seen how the days were prophetic. And so they actually did expect Messiah to come in that 4th day. And the Jewish sages saw that. Now, for example, we have this quote. This is in the Talmud in Sanhedrin 97. It says, "The world is to exist 6,000 years. In the first 2,000, there was desolation from Adam to Abraham. 2,000 years, the Torah flourished. And the next 2,000 years is the Messianic era. But through our many iniquities, all these years have been lost." In other words, they believed that is the reason the Messiah didn't come, because they had been too wicked. Actually, the Messiah did come, and they missed him. He did come exactly when they thought he was going to come. In Revelation 19:10, it tells us the testimony of Yeshua is the spirit of prophecy. The truth is, Yeshua the Messiah is central to prophecy. If you want to understand what prophecy is really about, you have to factor him into the prophecy. So we wonder, could the testimony of Yeshua's life bring greater understanding to this overall picture? Well, take a look at this. Luke exactly fixes the chronology of Messiah. Luke tells us that Messiah began his ministry in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. And that is something we can track very well. Plus, Luke mentions 4 other rulers who were ruling at the time. And we have that information as well. So all of this together pinpoints for us the year in which Yeshua Messiah took up his ministry. Messiah began his ministry when he was 30 years old, and using this information from Luke, that has to be in 29 AD. Now, what you're seeing on the slide here is this all worked out for you, and you can take a closer look at this slide, and you can see that as you look at the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, you have Yohanan, or John, beginning his ministry in the spring of 29 AD, which means Yeshua, who started 6 months later, began his ministry in the fall of 29 AD. So Yeshua was 30 years old when he began his ministry, and that was in 29 AD. So we can, from that information, easily determine the rest of his life. If you count back from 29 AD, 30 years, we see that he was born in the fall of 2 BC. If you count ahead from 29, you find out that Yeshua died in 33 AD. This is the length of Yeshua's life, the starting date and the end date. Now, Sir Isaac Newton was a very careful scholar, and he was one of many, in fact, that accepted this Luke-based chronology of Messiah. But he also respected the witness of those who lived close to Yeshua's time period, who set the time. We have a quote from Sir Isaac Newton, and he says, "The year of the Julian period, 4712, that's 2 BC, is the year in which Christ was born, according to Clemens, Alexandrinus, Arrhenia, Eusebius, Epiphanius, Jerome, Orosius, Cassiodorus, and other ancients." So those people who lived most closely to Messiah, who reported on it, also give us the same date. Now here's an interesting verse. Yeshua said, "While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." If the fourth day is about the light of the world, can the fourth day be over while the light of the world is still in the world? Do you understand what I'm saying? So that means that so long as Yeshua was in the world, that seventh day of the Sabbath day had to be continuing, right? So is this useful to us to find out the gap? It really is, isn't it? Messiah really helps us find out the gap, his lifetime. So this means that the fourth age of the seventh day had to continue at least until the death of Messiah in 33 AD. That adds 33 years right there. However, think about this. Messiah died after a ministry of 3.5 years. Is that a full time period? What is a full time period in the scriptures? According to Yahweh's time. Is not a full time period 7 years? 3.5 years is only half of it. So, when we look at this more closely, we see that Messiah's ministry was actually to the lost sheep of Israel. It was not to the nations. And the disciples continued that ministry to the lost sheep of Israel through the rest of that time period, that rest of that 7 years. In other words, an additional 3.5 years to fill out that 7 years. So, if Yeshua's death was in the half of a 7-year period, we would expect the rest of that 7-year period to also be a part of the same time period of that 1,000 years. So if that's true, then that means that that fourth day would actually progress all the way to 36 AD. And if that's true, then up to this point, the gap must be 36 years long. But, you know, that's reasonable, but do we have any other reason why we could accept that? Well, take a look at this. The next day, the fifth day, the fish and birds multiply. And what could this possibly mean except the spread of the good news, right? And in fact, fish are kind of a symbol, aren't they, of the spread of the good news. In 36, Saul, who would become Paul, was converted on the road to Damascus, according to apostolic history of the early church. And Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles. He was largely responsible of spreading the good news to the Gentiles. And interestingly, in that same year of 36, or right in that time frame, Peter immersed the first Gentile, Cornelius, which was the beginning of the Gentiles coming into the believers. So what we're saying here is that the apostolic outreach to the Gentiles actually began in 36 AD. And this clearly ties in with this fifth day, which pictures the spread of the good news. So I think this marks 36 as the year when the fourth day gave way to the fifth day. So now we have that established. We have 36 years for the gap. Let's take a look at more. Well, if we take and we put the 36 years in the gap, all right, we subtract from BC dates to indicate passage of time. You know, in AD dates, as the numbers go up, time passes. In BC dates, as the number goes down, time passes. So you have to actually subtract the 36-year gap from the 4001. That means that the seventh day begins in 3965 BC. Now, if we start counting from that point, we're starting very close to or right on the beginning of the seventh day. Does that make sense? Is everybody following the math? All right, let's go on. Now we've corrected the times for each of the days. We have added in the 36-year gap so that now we're starting at the beginning of day 7. And each of these 1,000-year periods are corrected as the actual 1,000-year periods of day 7. We've looked at day 4 already. We've looked at day 5 already. Day 6 is the day that we're in, the 6,000th year, right? Look at what happens in the 6,000th year. Man was created and given dominion. In the 6,000th year, man is created and takes dominion. We're talking now about the new man in Yeshua Messiah. Is being created in the earth and is taking dominion. Now, I have some verses for you. This may be a whole new idea for you. You might not understand this at all, because, you know, in the days that we're living in, for a lot of people, all they've ever heard about is being saved. They don't really even know there's something bigger than this. But when you look at Yeshua and the apostles, they were looking forward to something bigger than just a bunch of people being saved. They were looking forward to the perfecting of the body of Messiah as one new man in the fullness of Messiah. For instance, in John 17, Yeshua says, I in them and you in me, now he's praying to his Father, that they may be perfected into one, that the world may know that you sent me. You see, he's not talking about what's going to happen in eternity when all the believers are together in eternity, because the purpose of them being perfected into one is that the world will know. It's to be a witness to the world. So this must happen while this world still exists. Do you follow me? So they may be perfected into one. Now, when you look at believers in the world today, are they anything near perfected into one? Total division, right? Total division. And at this point in time, after this length of time, very clearly the church system is not going to accomplish this. And there is an answer to that, and we will get to that. But look at the other verses. You know, the apostles understood this too. In Ephesians chapter 4, Paul mentions this, again, using this word perfecting the holy ones, the body of Messiah, to a full-grown man, to the fullness of Messiah. In other words, what he sees happening in the earth is a corporate man that fully expresses Messiah in this world. Can you imagine that? That's what has to happen before this world is over. And it hasn't happened in day 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It has to happen before day 6 is over. Romans 8 talks about this. It says, "For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God." Why is the creation waiting for that? Because we can't go into the new creation until that happens, till the sons of God are revealed. That's really what this 6th day is all about. Revelation chapter 2. Messiah himself speaks to those who are his. And he says, "He who overcomes and he who keeps my works to the end, to him I will give authority over the nations. He will rule them with a rod of iron, shattering them like clay pots, as I also have received of my Father." Now, this is bold, isn't it? When we think about the rod of iron, we think about Yeshua Messiah having the rod of iron. But what Yeshua is saying to the overcomers is that I'm giving you the rod of iron, the same as I received from my Father. This speaks of taking dominion, and it's overcomers. You see, overcomers aren't just believers, are they? Overcomers are those who actually overcome the world, the flesh, and the devil to rule in the midst of the world. And this is the man-child of Revelation 12:5, where it tells us she brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. It says further there, the great dragon was thrown down. And then there's a voice that says, "Now the salvation, the power, and the kingdom of our Elohim and the authority of his Messiah has come." Satan's thrown down. Now the kingdom is in the world. Then it says they overcame him because of the Lamb's blood and because of the word of their testimony. The overcomers are actually responsible for Satan being thrown down. And why has that happened? Because they did what Adam and Eve didn't do. They stood up in the face of Satan and they overcame him. And there was no more place for him in heaven because he had been proven to be the liar that he is. That's man taking dominion. And that has to happen before this 6th day is over. Well, we've had a lot of progress towards that day. From a biblical perspective, the launching pad for the explosion of faith and freedom that arose during this period was the marriage between the translation of the Bible into the common language and the printing press. Now, before the printing press, around 1448, there were men who actually did translate parts of the Bible into the common language. However, this could not take hold because when you have to copy that out by hand, you really can't get it out to enough people to really start a movement. So they did start something through the translation, but it couldn't really get going until the printing press. Now, when the Gutenberg printing press was invented, the very first books printed were copies of the Bible. And you could even say the purpose of the printing press was to print copies of the Bible in the common language of the people. The Gutenberg Bible, the Wycliffe Bible, the Tyndale Bible, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, the Geneva Bible, and the King James Bible were all mass-produced. And they were inexpensive enough so that ordinary people were able to have their own Bible in their own language for the first time in history. And this is the most revolutionary thing that ever happened since Yeshua Messiah himself ever came onto this planet. You couldn't possibly even imagine how powerful this really was. Really, everything that we've seen happen since then has come about because people have had their own copy of the Bible, and it has revolutionized their lives and their thinking. The first thing that the Bible accomplished in the vernacular was the fact that it removed control of the Bible from the church and put it in the hands of the individual person so that now people could feed on the Word of God and they could be built up from within by the Spirit of God and they could come to the knowledge of God. This was such an amazing thing, we couldn't possibly overstate how important this really was. It was a step, in fact, towards that corporate man coming about in the earth. Well, now we're going to look at this in terms of how historians look at the time period and see how this phenomenon of the printing press and the Bible in the hands of the common man had an effect. The early modern period began in the early 16th century. And during this time, there was an explosion of Bible knowledge. And what did this lead to? The Bible is the book of freedom, friends. And people were being set free from a dictatorial church. And this freedom swept the world. The European Renaissance actually came out of this. Think about the great paintings, for example, right? Think about the statue of David. Things like this. The age of science and discovery. Think Isaac Newton. Okay? Because of the Bible, they felt free to search into creation to try and learn more about God. Certainly the Protestant Reformation came about because people now had the Bible. And not all who had the Bible became true believers, but there was always a Spirit-filled remnant that were true believers. And a great missionary outreach came out of this. And revivals sprung up everywhere as the gospel was taken around the world. Well, in the late modern period, this began in the mid-18th century, this was continuing. One thing that was happening that I'm not mentioning here is people like Strong and others who started producing very powerful reference works so that the ordinary person was able to actually look into the meaning of the languages of the Bible. And a lot of amazing scholarship was done during this time that we're still benefiting from. Also, the biblical concepts of freedom led to God-given rights enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. This has been a game changer in the world. This is the first time this has happened, friends. This was really an amazing thing that happened, that government leaders actually acknowledged that individual people had rights given by God that are sacrosanct and are not subject to the government. How amazing is that to actually exist in this world? The Bible did that. The end of slavery. Slavery has been with us since very, very early days. And in the Western world, it was believers, Bible believers, that brought an end to slavery. The Industrial Revolution came about from all of this freedom that people had to explore. Now, while all of this was happening, the biblical worldview was also being challenged by all the isms. Darwinism, materialism, atheism, totalitarianism, communism, and more. During this period, the world population reached 1 billion people near the start. 1 billion people. It took all of this time, all of these other 1,000-year days, to finally get to a place where there's just 1 billion people in the world. And it reached 2 billion around 1927. So here's what that means. We have, at this time, about 7.5 billion people in the world. We probably have more people alive in the world right now than ever existed in all of history. That's pretty huge, isn't it? What does that mean about God's harvest of the earth? Something to think about, isn't it? Now we look at contemporary history. Historians set that at about 1945 to the present. And I think that's because the Second World War changed the world so much. World War II ends in 1945, with the United States being the leader of the free world. Very big deal because of God-given rights being enshrined in the Constitution. So, this is really at the center of the freedom in the free world and the West. Now, do historians recognize that? Unfortunately, most of them don't recognize that. But that's the truth of history. Israel was declared a state in 1948, a very huge thing, something that had to happen. Israel had to once again be back in the land for all of the last days prophecies to happen. And it came about during this period. The United Nations was created at the beginning of this period, a beginning to a march toward a global government, which is prophesied for this last period. Now, to the other isms we talked about, we can now add massive social engineering during this period. This includes mass mind control like never before in history through the use of modern media and entertainment of all kinds, through schools and universities. And through all of this social engineering, secular worldview has come to a place of ascendancy over the biblical worldview. The secular worldview is based on paganism, feminism, the drug culture, the sexual revolution, abortion, the LGBTQ agenda, globalism, and other isms. And Because of this basically turning away from the source of the freedom in this world and people adopting these humanist and pagan ideas, persecution of believers has grown during this period to actually be greater than at any time in history. And we also see that the organized church, which many had great hopes for at the time of the Reformation, actually has been very disappointing and has suffered massive apostasy, has not been able to hold back the tide, but instead has been swept along with it and has declined over this period. And really is not the hope for that one new man to take authority in the world, for the oneness, for the unity. It can't possibly happen through the organized church. Okay. Now we're talking about the gap. Bringing the gap forward 2,000 years. What do we say? If we add in that gap, then the seventh age of the seventh day would start in 2036 AD. And if we look at the fourth age of man, in which Messiah came, and we look at the end of that period, and then we just correspond it with 2,000 years, it's amazing what happens. Messiah's ministry began in 29 AD. According to this timing, the tribulation will begin in the fall of 2029 AD, and the man-child ministry will begin that we were looking at in Revelation chapter 12. Also, Revelation 14 talks about it in other places. So we have Messiah as a human being on the earth beginning his ministry in 29 AD. We have the corporate man beginning his ministry at the beginning of the tribulation in 2029 AD. Isn't that amazing? We have Messiah's death and resurrection, where he is betrayed, and that happened in 33 AD. And in 2033 AD is when the reign of the Antichrist will begin. Isn't that an interesting correspondence? Exactly 2,000 years later, after the death of Messiah, we have the rise of the anti-Messiah. And he will reign for 3.5 years, the scriptures tell us, that bring us to 2036. The fourth age of the seventh day ended in 36. The sixth age of the seventh day will end in 2036. We have this interesting verse from Hosea 6, 1 and 2. Come and let us return to Yahweh. Now this is talking to Israel. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up that we may live in his sight. After 2 days, he will revive us. Exactly 2,000 years after Messiah's death is when the man-child ministry will be raised up in the earth. Isn't that amazing? And then on the third day, he will raise us up. Well, the third day from day 4 would be day 7. At the start of day 7 is when the resurrection of the dead in Messiah will occur. All of this prophesied in Scripture for us. In Matthew and Luke, it tells us about one generation in which all the signs that Messiah gave would occur and would end in his return. Luke tells us that this generation must begin at the end of the Gentile times, and it defines the Gentile times as times in which Jerusalem is trampled underfoot by the Gentiles. In other words, the Gentiles have control of Jerusalem. So that the Gentile times are over when the Jews, once again, are in control of Jerusalem. This actually happened in 1967, marking the beginning of the biblical end of the age generation. So the last year of the Gentile times was 1966. And the first year of the final generation was 1967. So if you take the last year of the Gentile times, 1966, and then you add 70 years for a biblical generation, this also ends in the year 2036 AD, exactly what we found by looking at the days of creation. So here we have two different approaches that yield us the same date. Now we want to talk about something special that is supposed to be happening during this period. This is something that you almost never hear about from any church. Some Messianic people talk about it. It is the exodus of the remnant of Israel. This is a last days event in Jeremiah chapter 23, talks about this. Verse 7 and 8 says, "Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they shall no more say, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But as Yahweh lives, who brought up and who led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all the countries where I had driven them, they shall dwell in their own land." Now, this is only one prophecy of many about this last days event that will happen. And it's talking about the children of Israel. In other places, it calls them the remnant of Israel. And these are the people who have been assimilated in all of the nations of the world who are actually the seed of Israel. But it's been many generations that they have been assimilated. They don't even know they're the seed of Israel. And when I say the seed of Israel, I'm not just talking about Jews who are of the tribe of Judah. I'm talking about people who are assimilated from all the different tribes of Israel, all 12 tribes as enumerated in Revelation chapter 7. And this is truly a miracle, that what has to happen for this exodus out of all the different nations is that Yahweh must awaken in the remnant a knowledge of who they are and a desire to be a part of his holy nation. And these people then actually need to be willing to return to their land. And it tells us that they are going to return to their own land. But it's going to be as the second Exodus. How did that happen in the first Exodus? It was an organized thing, right? The nation was an organized nation. And in this second Exodus that it's talking about, that's going to be even greater. The people of this nation, the remnant, are going to come from all the different nations. And they're going to assemble together as one nation. And just as Israel went out of Egypt, they're going to go out of a central location in this world and return to the land of Israel, where Yahweh has a place of safety for them. So while the church is crashing and burning, friends, Yahweh is at work raising up the solution, the remnant of Israel. That's really what this is telling us if we put all of these different prophecies together. Now, I've done this in other teachings already. This is getting long. I can't really go into this deeply enough here. Please come to our Tsiyon.org website and sign up and get looking at this information. We have so much free information. Find out what is really going to happen. You know, it's not going to be the rapture. It's going to be this. That is what's going to happen. Now, why is this so important to us? Well, because all of this is going to be involved. This is what is happening now during this time period. The Messianic remnant of Israel are being gathered. They will be organized according to the tribes of Israel. Yahweh will bring them back to the land in the remnant exodus. They will produce the 144,000 of Mount Zion, the man-child of the kingdom. Yahweh will use them to complete the harvest of the nations, and Yahweh's name will be glorified in Israel. Now, does that mean only those who are actually descendants of Israel can be included? No, because people of all nations can be grafted in to this group. Just like there was a vast mixed company that went out with Israel and became part of Israel in the first Exodus, the same thing can happen again. Why is this going to happen? Well, among other reasons, because big trouble is coming on the nations. And this is a way of escape for those who are righteous, for the overcomers. Remember this from our last teaching? This is showing how much of this last generation has gone by already. Notice all that is behind us. Notice the period of the gap, which we've now explained, and where we're at in 2018. There's not a lot of time left. This basically brings that information up to date with what I've just explained to you. So let's take a look at this. The yellow is the time period that Yahweh set aside for preparation of the remnant. That's what's going on right now, the period from 2015 to 2022. The remnant are being gathered and prepared for the remnant exodus. And things get really kind of dicey after this period, friends. So join us at Tsiyon.org and learn about this. Find out what's going on here. Because, Moses had a sign when he went to the people. Yahweh gave him a sign. He was able to put his rod down, and when it turned into a snake, everybody went, ah! And they knew he was supposed to be the leader. I have a sign too, and you're looking at it. I have this knowledge, and nobody else has this. I've been sitting on this for 20 years. Why do I have it? I have it because Yahweh tasked me with leading the remnant home in the second Exodus. And I tell you that because you need to know it, not because I want to brag about it. I think a lot like Moses, I might be just as happy if somebody else was doing this. But I need to do it because he's given me this job. So I'm laying it out for you very plainly. And I'm showing you right here that we're in a very favored time period right now. This is why things changed in the world. I don't know if you noticed this, but the world was really headed towards an early demise when things suddenly changed in the world and things started to get better. Why did that happen? It's because Yahweh intervened, and he is allowing us this favorable time to react to this truth, to react to the times that we're in, to do something about it. And we're halfway through this favorable time period right now, which will end in 2022. In 2023 to 2029, 7-year period, at some point in that period, the remnant exodus will occur. The remnant will be formed together as a single nation, and together as a nation under Yeshua Messiah, we will return to the land together, to a place of safety that Yahweh will have set aside for us, where no one can touch us. And we'll be really glad that happened, because in 2029, the 7-year Great Tribulation is going to break out. And it will be very much like that turbulent water we were looking at in our opening slide. It will be a time where any individual on their own is going to be in big trouble. Things are going to be so tumultuous. You know, already, if you're following the news, you're realizing the world is changing. And it's kind of scary how tumultuous that things can be. During that time, things are going to change so much in the world that it's truly amazing. There will be a one-world government. It will become dictatorial. There will actually be demonic spirits walking in the flesh on this planet, having a lot to do with the control of the world. There will be a surveillance of every person in the nations. There will be lists of people made. People will be forced to either come on board or be killed, according to Revelation 13. You don't want to be out in the nations when all of that happens. You want to be in the place of safety. However, that boat will have left port before the tribulation happens. So, the time to pay attention to this is now, not then. That's already too late. When you're in the rapids and you fall out of the boat, it's too late to think about having a life jacket. Who are these people? They are people who know the living God. They are people who know the truth when they hear it. I hope that you are one of those people, because there's a lot at stake for everybody. And all you have to do is read the book of Revelation, and you'll understand that that period we're approaching is not anything to take for granted. You know, some people might look at this and say, oh, well, we're getting close now to the return of Messiah. So all I have to do is just wait it out a few years, and then I'll be fine. Well, let me tell you, that's foolish. It's time to be getting ready. That's what it's time to be doing. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time on things that are not essential. Build yourself up in your relationship with God. Learn what it means to be part of his nation. Prepare yourself for the second Exodus. It's a complete paradigm change that we need to make. And I'm just telling you what the truth is. You need to make this change, and you need to do it as soon as you possibly can do it. Habakkuk 2 and 3 says this. Yahweh answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables. That's what I've tried to do here. That's what all these slides are, tables, making it plain. That he may rush. It says run, and the Hebrew word also means rush. That he may rush that readeth it. In other words, it's saying that there's an urgency. That's what the tables are about, making it plain. That those who receive this message need to take it and run with it. It's urgent. It goes on, for the vision is yet for the appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. The last age of the world, a time of great crisis, a time when every human being will have to choose a side, a time when individuals will be out of control. Don't wait until we get that far to make a choice. If you decide that you need a lifeline for those coming days, come and sign up free of charge at tsiyon.org. And can you help us get this message out to other people? Please like and subscribe the video and do whatever else you can to get this video around to other people. Let's just close this message with a prayer. Father, we want to come to you here at the end of this series of messages. We pray, Father, that you might get this video into the hands of every person that needs to see it. And Father, I just pray that you might energize the hearts and minds of your remnant to see and understand the days we're in and to take action. Father, truly you are in control of the ages of time. And all of them exist because you have a plan and a purpose that you're working out. And Father, we just pray for the righteous that they might respond to your word. We want to give you glory and honor and praise, Father, in Yeshua's name. Amen. And we thank all of you for being with us for this series of messages. We hope that we hear from you soon.
This has been a live broadcast from the Tsiyon Tabernacle. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. See you next week.
My laws are just, my ways
Shabbat
are
Shalom.
right.